Adonai, נביע לצור אישנו, לכו נרננה לאדוני, נביע לצור אישנו, קדימה, לכו נרננה לאדוני, נביע לצור אישנו, לכו נרננה.
So today's portion is called HaAzinu, and it means to give ear. And we're going to be covering Deuteronomy 32, 1 through 52. So let's get started. So as I said, HaAzinu means to give ear, and I wanted to show you it in its verbal form, which is the word azan. Azan means to ponder, to absorb, and weigh impressions. So our ears are to absorb what we hear and then weigh it in our hearts and in our minds. And what is so beautiful about this, it's the root word in Hebrew for balance. So God gave us two ears, and what is balanced? A scale. And that's where we get the word Moznaim, which is the name for a scale. All they do is add a mem in the beginning and then a final mem at the end. And you get that word for scale. Now, Moses taught them a song. A song is called a shir in Hebrew. And if you know Song of Solomon, it is Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. And this song that Moses is teaching them is to be a remembrance. In other words, once they learn it, that song will just roll around in their head year after year after year. And like many of us today, we remember songs from our past, even from our childhood and our earliest years. Now, a modern title for this song could be Fair and Balanced. Okay, because that's what a scale is. And to me, I was looking at this and going, oh my gosh, if you could pick four things, north, south, east, west, and have perfect balance, what would it look like? Well, that fair and balanced scale would be justice and righteousness balanced with God's mercy and grace. And let me show you another picture. Isaiah 28:7 says, I will make justice the measuring line and righteousness the plumb line. And you know what this word is for plumb line in Hebrew? It's the word kavah. Kavah means hope. So if something is just and right, we can place our hope in it. But what is so beautifully balanced here is that if we were judged just by our own righteousness or holiness, there is no hope because we all have sinned. So what God does is he balances it perfect as he raises Jesus on the cross and he holds out his arms in grace, which is giving us what we don't deserve, forgiveness and eternal life, and not giving us what we do deserve, which is death. So the cross is a perfect picture of fair and balanced. And boy, is that a picture for me. It's really powerful, I think. So the song that Moses taught them was not like the Song of the Sea. Remember, if you followed me all the way through the Torah, you know that Moses and his sister Miriam sang the Song of the Sea. This was praising Adonai for his redemption, taking them out of bondage. It was a celebration. That redemption, or Geulah, is what the whole Bible is about, redeeming us from bondage and darkness. This song, however, is different. This is going to be a witness against Yisrael or Israel, and it's prophetic in nature. By the way, if you just subscribe to the channel, you don't receive my emails and some explanation and other important information. So if you want to also get the PowerPoints and my emails, you can just email me shoot me a quick email to rjlevis@gmail.com, and I will put you on the group contact list and you'll be receiving all of it. So this song is prophetic. Why? Because Israel is going to repeat their mistakes over and over. And why? This is because we all default back to who we really are, which are broken, fallen people. And we always will revert back to our own fleshly desires, which puts the self first above others. And I don't care how nice you think you are, and all the good deeds you do will never, ever be enough, because we all have sinned and fallen short, right? So Moses appeals to two things. He appeals to the heavens, Hashemayim, first, and then to the earth, Haaretz. Now, these are the two witnesses. Moses is appealing to heaven and earth as two witnesses to this verdict that is going to be in the song here that he's teaching them. So God is going to give the penalty and final verdict. And so this is what we're talking about here. Okay, it's a very Jewish concept, by the way, because all our mitzvot or good deeds are done to bring unity. And unity are our good deeds. It makes us feel good when we do something for others, right? It's like God is letting us have this unity in our good deeds. However, originally, the unity was to bring heaven to earth. And many Jews, most Jews, I should say, don't talk about going to heaven. What they talk about and what they wait for and long for is to bring heaven down to earth. And that will be the ultimate when the Messiah comes. Of course, we know he brought the ultimate down when he died on that cross and had that perfect balance of both justice and righteousness, but also God's mercy and grace. The cross fully demonstrated the true character of the Messiah. So they call this bringing heaven down, tikkun olam, which means to heal the world finally. And so they're waiting for the Messiah. Of course, we know he came once and he's coming a second time. First time as a suffering servant, second time as a reigning king. And aren't we thankful for that? So Exodus 4:10, Moses started his life this way. And I love looking back and seeing some patterns and then saying, Lord, how does that apply to me? So some people think, oh, the Old Testament's so antiquated and, that's all just rules and laws. And I just like the New Testament where it's all about love and grace and good things like that. Well, if you look back and you look at Moses' life, the example of the most humble man, Jesus said, in all of the Bible, then let's see how he started his life and how he ended his life. So I want to just take a minute to do that. So remember, he started at the burning bush with these words. When God told him that he was going to send him to bring the people out of Egypt and out of bondage, what did he say? I am slow of tongue, unable to speak well, God. And then God says to Moses, go to Pharaoh. I will tell you what to say. So he complains first and says, I'm just not enough to do this task. Well, many times when God calls on us as believers to do something, sometimes that's our first response, isn't it? Well, God, who am I to do that? Or God, I don't know how to do that. And he goes, no. All I'm asking for you is to show up and just obey. And then let me work through you. And apart from me, you can really do nothing. Well, we can do lots of things in the world's view, but in God's eyes, my plans, my abilities are really about zero. It's when he's working through me that God is most pleased. So in God's hands, we all have potential, right? So now at the end of his life, we see Moses writing the entire Torah, and he's writing it in the form of a song for all of Israel to sing. One song with one voice. And then I took it all the way to the end of the world in Revelation, where we're all going to be singing one song before the King. And it's going to be with one voice. In other words, the bride of the Messiah will be at the wedding feast, and there'll be celebration, and we'll be singing the wedding song. And so notice how Moses starts this song. I will proclaim his name and declare his greatness. Wow, has he changed based on the beginning of his walk with God and then at the end? Look at what God did in Moses' life, and he'll do it in yours and mine as well. So take courage if you're feeling discouraged in any way about how far you are in the Lord or how many times you've let him down or you're such a sinner that God could never use you. Have you ever said those things? I know I have. So just take heart that God does it through you. All you do is show up. So being slow of tongue was actually transformed by God into a powerful song that they'll sing through all generations. Wow, what an exclamation point at the end of Moses' life. Now remember, Moses encounters with the rock, you know, the one who provided the living water in the Midbar or the wilderness. This song is to testify against them, both in the past and what they're going to do in the future, because God knows they're going to keep repeating the cycle. The cycle just goes on and on. But what it's doing is pointing to the New Testament when the Messiah says that he is the living water and he is the rock of our salvation. And so this is tied to Moses, Jesus' words and Moses' words. Now, remember last week I said their names share two of the same letters, Mashiach, Moshe. See, M and S, M-S, okay. So there's a connection here, and that's why I love studying Torah, because the words and actions of Jesus are actually fulfilling all that's taught in the Torah. So if we don't know what our foundation is, then we can't fully appreciate the things that Yeshua says. Now remember, it was Peter who identified Jesus as the Messiah. And Jesus turned to him and said, upon this rock, I'll build my church. He meant the Messiah, not Peter. So he says, and I'll build my kingdom or my church on this rock, the Messiah. And the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Not him, it. So the church's foundation will be on the Messiah, the rock of our foundation, the bedrock. Okay, so traditionally people have said, oh, that must be St. Peter and the St. Peter statues everywhere. But it was Peter who identified who Jesus really was. And he said, on this, that concept, I'm going to build my church. So perhaps it was Peter's recognition and not Peter himself that was the rock. Look at Psalm 18. The Lord is my rock. He is my foundation. So look at Psalm 62, 1-2. My soul finds rest in God alone. My salvation comes from him. That's not Peter. He alone is my rock and my salvation. So Peter is not the foundation, it's the Messiah. And it says, he is my fortress and I will never be shaken. Hell will not prevail against God's kingdom. And that takes us right back to the garden when it says the very first thing about God's kingdom ruling over the satanic kingdom of this world. And we're going to be talking about that in great detail when we begin Genesis 1:1. So I'm not going to go into it here. Here's some of the words to the song. Look what is credited to God. He alone was like a father to them. So Moses is reminding them, God or heaven, here's what heaven did for you, earth. So here's what heaven is going to testify against what happened on earth. I loved them. I redeemed them. I guided them. I carried them. I clothed them. I hovered over them to protect them. I guarded them. I sustained them. I watered them. I prevented their enemies from overtaking them. And I gave them a promised inheritance and brought them in faithfully. So this is what heaven did for earth. Now let's look at the response of earth to heaven. Here are the words credited to those whom Adonai loved and redeemed, but what? Turned away. And this is their condition. He said they were corrupted, perverted, they scorned him, they ignored him, they forgot about him. They actually sacrificed to demons. They turned away from him. They had no common sense. They lacked discernment. They roused him to jealousy, and they provoked him eventually to God's wrath. So all the good that God had intended, the needle went in the opposite direction in this song. Now in Deuteronomy 32:15, it says, yet Yeshurun grew fat and kicked. He abandoned God, his maker. He scorned the rock, his salvation. Who's he talking about? He's talking about the Messiah. So Yeshurun, by the way, is the poetic name for Israel. So you see the first three letters of Yeshurun, it's Yod, Shin, Resh. Well, here's Israel, Yod, Shin, Resh. So this is the straight or goodness of God, and that's Israel's name. So it says you ignored the rock that what? Fathered you. Oh my gosh. So God was their father. And just like a father, he guided, protected, provided, right? So it's the Messiah that is our rock. And it said you grew fat and kicked and then abandoned. Now, this is a picture of every generation that turns its back on the Messiah. What happens? God gives them the blessings. And what happens? They grow fat and lethargic and apathetic, and then that apathy creates this indifference, and indifference then creates a forgetting. The forgetting then, man makes new ways and new rules, and before you know it, he's right back into this, right back into a fallen state where there's perversion and there is disorder and disharmony. So this happened in every great kingdom, whether it was the Syrian, the Persian, the Roman Empire, all the Ottoman Empire, you name it. And this is what happened. It's called the cycle of the rise and the fall. And so this is what we're being warned against in this song. So God's response, he said, I considered putting an end to them, erasing their memory from the earth, but I feared the mocking of the enemies. They that think to themselves, oh, we ourselves accomplished this. God had nothing to do with this. Isn't that what we're hearing today when we see things? I'm not saying every single thing that goes wrong, but you're either born of God's kingdom or without even knowing it, as your default, you're doing God's opposite, which is the kingdom of this world. And who's in charge of that? HaSatan. And I wanted to show you this. It says, how could one chase 1,000 and two put 10,000 to flight unless their rock had sold them, unless Adonai had given them up? So in other words, if they would trust in him, they wouldn't have been given up to their enemies, but they failed time and time again. Indeed, their rock, what they depend on, which is themselves, is not like our rock, which is the one true God of Israel. So even our enemies themselves know this or can discern that or judge this. So as I've said in the past, you will always see those that are anti-God or anti-God's kingdom as the mockers. And I call it the mocking spirit, the one that says, God isn't doing this. There is no God. Religion is your opium of the masses. Well, I don't think they'll be singing that song when Jesus comes in his glory. He is coming again, and you can bank on that. So what will be the consequences? Well, it says they will be fatigued by hunger, in other words, never satisfied, consumed with fever, filled with defeat. The sword will make parents childless. Poison reptiles will come against them. Their vine is of Sodom and Gomorrah. Their wine is snake poison. Their feet will slip, and calamity will come. And so this is what happens as the consequence when we turn our backs on God. Now, when Moses finished the song, he said, sing out the words to this song. Take to heart the words of my testimony. Use this song to command your children to stand on these words of Torah. And isn't that exactly what Jesus talked about when he said, all other foundations are sinking sand, when he says, stand on the true rock, which is Jesus the Messiah. So Jesus told a parable about standing on the rock, didn't he? So could the song that Moses be playing as background music show up when we all stand before God's face someday? I was thinking to myself, maybe that song will be playing in the background to remind them, heaven and earth as the two witnesses of what they did when they turned their backs on God. Now in Deuteronomy 18, we can look back and remember that Moses told the Israelites that God would raise up a prophet from among them, from the Israelites, and that would be Yeshua or Jesus, and that God would hold to account anyone who did not listen to the words of the prophet who would speak in his name, God's name. That's exactly who the Messiah was in Yeshua. Jesus said to those that turned their backs on him as the Messiah, do not think that I will accuse you before the Father. See, Jesus is talking about God as a father. Do you know who will accuse you? It'll be Moses, the very one you have counted on to follow rules but not have a relationship with the one true God. For if you had believed Moses and actually followed and obeyed, you would have believed me because he wrote. Remember what he was writing? There'll be one that will come after me. He said, if you'd believed Moses, you'd believe what he wrote about me. So this again is the tie between the Old and the New Testament. Now Jesus said to them, this is what I told you while I was still with you. Everything must be fulfilled that's written about me in the what? In the law of Moses. So remember, the Torah and the law are holy and righteous and good. The problem wasn't in heaven and what was written. It was that on earth, man was unable to walk it out. Then he opened their minds to what? Understand the scriptures. And by the way, that word understand is binah. Binah means to understand or to build. So when we understand something, that becomes foundational for us to build on. So you can see how Jesus opened their minds so they could build on that foundation of the Messiah. The only scriptures that were available, remember, when Jesus said this, was the Tanakh, the Torah, the Netuvim, and the Ketuvim, the writings, the prophets, and the Torah. And these are the 5 books of Moses, the Torah. And here is where you get the name of their Bible, which I'm going to be talking about when we begin the new cycle. You're going to learn so much. Please share this and have others do this. The Tanakh is the T, the N, and the K, and that stands for the Torah, which are the 5 books of Moses, the Nevi'im are the prophets, and the Ketuvim are the writings. So that's T, N, K. There's the acrostic. So Jesus was talked about in all of these things and then revealed, concealed in the law and the Torah and the prophets, but revealed in the New Testament. God said to Moses then, go up on Mount Nebo and see the land of Canaan. So this would be Israel's future, but not Moses. Now his entire life must have just flashed before him, both his beginnings, his failures, his victories, his defeats, and his final place of glory, which was where? On the mountaintop. Where did it begin with the 10 words or the 10 commandments? On a mountaintop. So God took him to the mountaintop at the beginning, and then he ended at the mountaintop. And for me, what that says is, he who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it in the end. So then God said, you're going to be gathered to your fathers. However, you will not cross over. Okay, they were on the east side of the Jordan, and they were about to cross over into Canaan, right by Jericho. And it was because Moses and Aaron didn't give God the glory when they stood in front of the rock. And God said, just speak to the rock. You don't have to hit it. And yet Moses struck it twice. So perhaps that represented the 2 destinies Both Aaron and Moses died on mountaintops and never stepped into the promised land. So he says they didn't give God glory. Look at the word for glory. It's kavod. And it means to weigh the importance or value of something. So isn't it interesting that this portion is called HaAzinu, which are 2 ears to hear and to weigh all the truth? Okay. And he says, why can't you go in? Because you didn't weigh my words properly. And so you are cut short of the ultimate promise. Although he used Moses, Moses too wasn't perfect, was he? He was a fallen man who God used in spite of his shortcomings. Now remember, Moses had actually killed somebody way back in Exodus. So just know that God can use people like you and I. We all have potential when we're placed in God's hands. So Aaron and Moses were given new life and crossed over back when they were first born. Do you remember? Oh my gosh. Okay, here's what hit me this time. They both were given new life, just like the children of Israel were going to get a new life in the promised land. They would all cross over and have a new life. Well, in the beginning, this is how Aaron and Moses both started, right? Their mother gave them birth. They crossed over into new life. And guess what? What was their mother's name? Jochebed. And what does it mean? God's glory. Oh my goodness, I never saw this before. And I'm like, oh, what? Wait a minute. There's something to be said in this word for glory. He said, you didn't give me glory, so you're not going in. But yet, their mother, whose name was God's glory, actually started that way by giving him new life. And they crossed over from darkness of the womb into the world. So that's exactly what happens when we're born again. We're taken from God's womb and given new life to live out on this earth. So there's so much richness in these Hebrew words. This is a word you definitely want to put in your Hebrew word book. So remember, the word for river, remember I told you that was kahal, and it means what you inherit. Well, I got to thinking, our inheritance comes from above, right? Just like the rain comes from above and it comes down and it flows down from the top of the mountain to the rest of the world, and it hits the lowest and the highest, doesn't it? Well, this is the word for inheritance, a river. And we see in the very end of the scriptures, it says, I saw a river flowing from God's throne, from his place of glory. And that's our inheritance. And what came from this rock originally? Water. So this is all a beautiful picture of the beginning and the end of our faith. And God is faithful to bring it to completion. Now, our Messiah's Sermon on the Mount, remember that? He said, the sun shines on both evil and good. And God sends what? The water, the rain on both the just and the unjust. Now, Jesus ends that with these words, be ye perfect as my Father in heaven is perfect. I want to look at that word just briefly. In Greek, perfect is teleos. And here it is. I pulled this up on Strong's. And it means to be brought to its end or to be finished or to lack nothing. So when Jesus says, be ye perfect, it means be whole. You'll lack nothing if you follow me and obey and listen to what I teach you as truth. So in Hebrew, it's tamim shalem, and it means to consummate human integrity and virtue, that which is perfect. And I'm like, oh my goodness, in Hebrew, it has the word peace in it, perfect peace. And what does it say? He will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are set on thee. Who is thee? The Messiah, our foundation. Our minds are at peace. See how beautiful all these words are connected. This is why you want to learn your basic letters so you can begin to see these beautiful connections for yourself. So Isaiah 26:3, let's look at that. You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds, and here's the word for that, lean on you, because he trusts in the foundation. He trusts in you. To lean is the word samek, and it's actually this name of this letter. It starts that word, samek. Okay, it means to support, to cling to, or rest on. Now the rain brought Israel what? Peace. Why? Because the rain multiplied the seed and sustained them. It was their food. So rain sustains, and it comes from heaven, and it means a future harvest. So this was agricultural language. So when we see the rain coming from heaven, it's our inheritance that brings on fruitfulness and food to sustain us. So all these things are so beautiful when you look at them in their Hebrew words, Feast of Sukkot, or the ingathering of that fall harvest. And it's also called the Feast of Tabernacle, and it is the feast of also ingathering. Now, Sukkot comes from the word sakach, and it means to cover, protect, and it's also means the tabernacle, because it's a place of protection. And it's also the word for a booth or being covered, okay? So during Sukkot, they build temporary coverings or shelters to remind them of wandering in the desert when God was faithful to them to bring them to this place called the Promised Land. And it's also the time that they all gather. They celebrate the end of the cycle of ingathering. They sing, they dance, they feast, and they pray for what? Rain, for more inheritance. And I'm like, this is something churches should be doing. We could get together and teach these principles. We can't keep Torah perfectly today. There's no temple. There's no more sacrifices. But we can take the principles of Torah and incorporate them into our worship and actually teach these principles. They're going to look different in our culture and in our context, but we can still celebrate the principles of Torah. This is why we need to know what they are. So in the future, the rabbis believe that this is the only feast that'll be celebrated when Messiah returns. And doesn't that make sense when we think about the end of Revelation, when they talk about the wedding supper of the Lamb, when only those with robes of righteousness will be let in? The whole time he calls to everyone in the streets, come, 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 come to the wedding. But those that reject and turn their backs will be cast out, and the door will be shut and locked, and it'll be too late then. So the Bible begins with a couple in this place of provision, and it ends with the bride and groom in a place of provision and protection. So this is the final tabernacle of Sukkot. And I'm going to show you some other things that are beautiful about that. Now, the Feast of Tabernacle is when they're waiting for rain for what? A new harvest. So this could be a time when Christians pray about, Lord, bring revival, bring a new harvest of believers, bring all those that are stragglers on the edges. So this was a 7-day feast. There's that number 7 again. So from day 2 to day 7, they had a celebration of the pouring out of water. And then on the 8th day, it was their day of greatest joy. Remember, I said 8 is the day of starting over. So you have 7 in a cycle, and then the 8 starts it over. We're going to talk about that in Genesis 1, so I'm not going to do it here. At this particular festival of Sukkot, they recite Isaiah 12:3. Therefore, we with joy, simcha, we will draw water from the wells of salvation. And this is exactly what they do even today, is they go and draw water from the river, and they bring it and pour it over the altar. Of course, there is no altar, so I don't know where they pour it in Jerusalem now. Probably they bring it up to a place of celebration. I'm not sure. I might have to look that up, so next time I'll know. If anybody knows, email me. Okay, so during the Second Temple period, there was a 70-foot high menorah in the inner court. Now, all the courtyards in Jerusalem were lit with these huge menorahs. They weren't like our menorahs this high. Okay, so the wicks were made of the priest's old garments. It was reminiscent of the Shekinah glory that was present when Solomon first inaugurated the temple. Remember that? It said he had this huge celebration when David wanted to build the temple. And he said, but David, you're a man of with blood on your hands. He had killed people. So he said, your son Solomon will be the one to build me a temple. And it was so amazing that they had this celebration and all these menorahs lit up the courtyards in Jerusalem with the inauguration of Solomon's temple. It was so spectacular that the rabbis say, if you haven't experienced this kind of light in Jerusalem, then you don't know true joy. Wouldn't that be fantastic for us, all believers, to be able to be in Jerusalem when they have these menorahs lit in every courtyard? Talk about a city on a hill that's lit. That's what Jesus was talking about when he said, when you have light, you put it on a lampstand. Well, that's exactly what they do in this particular feast. So 6 days, they had 3 blasts of a silver trumpet, and the Levitical priests circled the altar. Now I'm talking about in the days of the temple. They circled the altar 3 times for 6 days. Then on the 7th day, which was Hoshana Rabbah, or the great day, they followed by this water pouring ceremony when all would parade back to the temple and pour it then on the altar. And the trumpets, and they were singing, and the lit menorahs, there was great joy. Now there were 3 sets of 7 blasts on the 7th day. So there's your 7 again. And they went 7 times around the altar. Remember, the word for 7 is Sheva, and it means oath also. So this is a final oath. In other words, something that's fixed. And so we see 3 sets of the 7 blasts and the 7 times circling the altar. They also carried palm branches and sang the great Hosanna, or Hoshiana in Hebrew. So this was done Hoshana Rabbah, which is the day that they would circle 7 times and sing. Then what would happen is on the 8th day, this was called the 8th and final day of the water and the light ceremonies. This was the day that Yeshua taught in the temple and stood up and said, I am the light of the world. And later that day, Yeshua healed the blind man and said, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So he said it twice in one day. The light of this world and the light of the world to come. Now the 8th day was a Sabbath, and the Pharisees knew that Jesus was claiming to be the Messiah. Why? Because he said, I am the true light. In other words, they were waiting for the Messiah to come when all Jerusalem would celebrate this final feast. And Jesus says, oh, I am the one you've been waiting for. I am the Messiah that you've all been waiting for, to light up Jerusalem. And so they thought they had to find something wrong. So they accused him of healing on the Sabbath. And of course, we all know that Jesus says, the Sabbath wasn't made, man wasn't made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man to show them God's holiness and final rest. So Jesus said, which is better, to heal and make somebody whole, which is what the Sabbath was a picture of, holiness, or, to keep the law. So see, Jesus was functioning in the spirit of the law, and they had to find something to kill him for, right? More detail. But I wanted to show you some fun homemade sukkahs that I found online. People can build these. You can build one. You can just make a little temporary shelter. If you have a tent, put it up in your backyard and teach your children these principles of joy and celebration and feasting and being called into that final trumpet blast when the Messiah returns and being counted as righteous and putting on the wedding clothes. And so this is a wonderful way to end this teaching today. And I want to recommend this book. It's so excellent. It's called The Feasts of the Lord by Kevin Howard and Marvin Rosenthal. Here's one of the pages. They have beautiful pictures. And here's some of the things that you can see inside the book. The Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, all the 7 feasts, and then additional observances, which we can incorporate into our um, celebration and worship services, not so that we can be Torah keepers, but that we can take the principles of Torah and incorporate them into our life today. So that is a great way to end here. I pray that you will enjoy this coming week as you think about ways and pray about ways that you can incorporate some of the things that you've learned today into your worship service when you go celebrate this weekend.